Good morning, guys, and welcome back to World Building with Aristotle, or whatever it is that we're exactly calling this series. A little world building workshop that I'm working on, based around the idea of Aristotle's four elements. So today, or last time, we laid sort of the foundation for our elemental world, shaped by four primordial beings, where magic, fate, and civilization are all deeply kind of intertwined into this idea of elements and the four and optional fifth element, ether. Today, we are going to be taking that next step and exploring how nations, factions, political power structures form in a world that has these sort of powerful, sort of godly elemental influences. We're going to dive into how elements influence societies, the rise of early tribes, confederations, conflicts, alliances, power struggles that define the world. We're also going to discuss kind of how Aether, the balancing force, shapes politics and keeps the elements from running rampant. Along the way, I'm going to be kind of asking for your input. So get ready to share your ideas in the chat. Even if I don't ask for them, feel free to share those ideas whenever you get one that you think is cool. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to check out the last stream. I've got it linked in the description here. It sort of sets that foundation for what we're doing in this stream. If you have been following along, let me know in the chat and let me know what you thought about last stream, and what kind of nations or factions do you think would emerge in this world. Let's very quickly go ahead and rehash last session. So we've got our world that is a world that was created by four primordial beings, which control the four elements respectively: earth, air, fire, and water. They created the world. Its topography is mostly like our own. So it's not like the Avatar, four nations, or kind of that way of looking at things. Most people basically are normal. Most of the world is normal, very much like our own. Except for a few places where one element or a combination of them holds sway and is more powerful. For instance, flatlands are owned by air, and air is more powerful there. Deserts are owned by fire and or earth, and they are more powerful there. The joint ownership situations can happen in a few different ways: by alliance, truce, treaty, what have you, between the elemental forces, or by rivalry and competition among those same forces. Sometimes there are even places where an ancient treaty might still stand, but those elemental gods that agreed on something here are now warring against one another. So some regions have, pardon me, need to go get some water. Some of these regions have such a high concentration of elemental power that they become magical in a similar fashion to like the Princess Bride's fire swamp. It's because the elements make up all things. Even though they don't seem elemental, everything is made up of a combination of those elements. That was kind of the premise that we started with, the Aristotle's four elements. Even magic is made up of the four elements. This, however, is where the fifth element, ether, comes in. Ether is like the fate of this world. It's the guiding force that keeps everything in check. It is sort of the sky that moves the celestial bodies, binding fate. It also maintains a sort of dynamic equilibrium between the elements by moving some planets closer and further away that resonate with elemental powers, so that none of them become too powerful, aside from the rare instances where there are natural disasters like solar flares and things like that, that push the elements to greater strength than what the Aether can control. But these are rare, sort of once in a lifetime things. Magic is also, again, an effect of the ether. When ether combines with another element, it creates a school of magic, depending on the circumstances in the ether at that time. Earth might produce abjuration, sort of that shielding, warding, strength aspect of abjuration, or it might produce necromancy, because that's where all of the dead things go. Just depends on what's going on in the heavens. Finally, magic exists only in certain regions, namely the regions where one or more elements hold sway. This could really have some implications for casters and limitations on where they came from, etc., etc., etc. But also, when they're near those areas, there tends to be people who have societies built around the elements that hold sway. Though most of the world, again, keeps societies built on their own natural resources or abilities, just like the real world. These elemental cultures are rare, but they're powerful because they possess more powerful magic. Again, we talked kind of about how the places where magic exists do tend to hold plenty more power than most other places, simply because that's where magic exists. And cultures with magic are going to be inherently more powerful than cultures without. Let's see. Oh, yeah. People that are born at or near an elemental place of power, or while certain elemental planets are in the ether, they may sometimes take on certain traits associated with that element, combining them in unique ways to form different personalities, etc., etc., etc. Sort of how our own astrology functions. It's kind of where you were born combined with what's in the sky when you were born. It may affect some in-depth things about your personality. I don't know if I said this overtly last time, but based on the way it is, I feel like this is a very young world. Like, we're probably within the first 5,000 years after its creation. I don't know if I still don't know if I want the world to have been like the people and the animals and stuff to have been created directly by the elements, or if that was kind of an evolutionary process that developed as the elements sort of found their own life and way of being. But I'm gonna still put a hold on that, and maybe address it a little bit later. We'll see. So since it's a young world, when we look at our own world when humanity was much younger, we do see a lot of more localized, tribalized societies. And we'll talk a little bit more about the types of tribes and things of that nature. But that's kind of what we're looking at in this world as well. A lot of clans, tribes, etc. And with that all said, I think we can get into what's going on. Let's see. Let me make sure that I can see my chat. There we go. So again, I've got some questions, some sort of prompts that I have ready, and I'll try and stay more on topic this time, and I will briefly pause every now and again to drink more of my, once again, Irish coffee. Let's go ahead and switch up this music as well, because I think Aether is probably going to be a good mix for this. Excellent. So, the role of the elements in society, we'll have to kind of decide this before we really decide much of anything else, because again, I didn't come into this with a whole lot of prep. It's mostly just things that I would need to think about, etc. So let's establish this and then we'll get moving. How do the elements shape civilization? We talked about it not being a crazy strong influence that the elements themselves have, but it is a recognized fact that everything is made up of the elements. So you are going to have some of that, like, you're going to have some of that recognition of, like, this is what we're made up of. You're going to have some of that recognition and some of that respect and reverence. But a lot of people are going to live kind of outside of that direct influence because there are only a few places where elements hold actual sway. I would say a lot of people, because a lot of them don't live directly in the elemental areas and a lot of them don't have magic, a lot of them are probably going to live in these early stages in a great deal of fear and superstition that kind of guide their cultural outlook. I think that that we're going to see very much like, again, like our own history. The earliest civilizations were hey, welcome in. The earliest civilizations were mostly, they were guided by some philosophies that and some religions, faiths, etc., that led them to a great deal of superstition and fear of their surroundings, in addition to that respect. So I think that that's going to have a great part to play here. Some societies are going to embrace the elements. Others are going to use them to gain something. So we might have again some like more religiously geared societies that embrace the elements, that take them as like their gods, as their angels and demons, etc. We're going to have some that probably are using them in more of a, almost like an agriculturalist way. Like you're kind of that practical mentality of, okay, but how do I use it to survive? How do I use it to do what I need to do? And perhaps those are going to be our more like science-driven societies. Others might seek to avoid. I think others are definitely going to sort of try and almost like hide from the elements. They're going to try and like suppress, counteract these elemental influences. I think that this is going to be a lot of what we see throughout the world, because again, we're talking about a world where we're not talking about a typical high fantasy world. Where a young world is not one that is it's not one that's developed. It's not one that has in-depth philosophies and faiths and systems of belief. It's not one where really there's probably a lot of peace because of the fear that's present and the tribalism that's there. When you start looking at sort of that us versus them, in that's commonly present among tribal societies, there's the our tribe versus their tribe, this survival. We're probably going to see a lot of that in most of the world at large, that they sort of seek to avoid, suppress, or counteracting the elemental influence. So there, I think we do have kind of like those three types of societies. Then we've got some that are gonna welcome the elements, even perhaps worship them, perhaps base their societies around that elemental influence. But we've got some that are going to try and use it, sort of harness it, like windmills, dams that power things, very more scientifically geared societies. And we've got some that are going to try to avoid or suppress those things. If you're coming in, guys, welcome. We are sort of following up on our last video about the 4 elements in fantasy worlds. Today we are focusing on nations, factions, political stuff. So now that we've kind of got those 3 things, those 3 types of societies and civilizations, let's figure out let's figure out how tribal structures and early nations are going to form, are going to interact, and that sort of thing. Hello, guys. Sorry, my coffee has some sweet cream on it, so I just got it in my mustache. So, why is it that I think that most of these societies in the world that we've built are going to be tribal? Because again, we're talking about, like, when we look at our own real world history. I said a lot of this is going to be very reminiscent of our own real world. When we look at our real world history, we see the formation of a lot of clans and tribes to begin with. Things were on small scales. It was families that developed into like started as families, into clans, into tribes, into nations, or into confederacies, into nations, and into empires. So we are talking about these kind of small pockets of people that likely have the same heritage or the same belief system, etc. You lack sort of infrastructure in any great way. You're gonna have elemental hazards. You're gonna have, like, again, we talked about kind of the fire swamp idea of this, where water, earth, and fire all sort of are vying for power, and it results in this magical clash. Well, those are crazy elemental hazards that people are gonna have to band together to to defend against. But long-term settlements in these areas aren't going to be possible because it's too dangerous. So you are probably talking about for a great deal of these people, you're probably talking about nomadic tribes as well that are trying to survive if they can lay down roots, establish a civilization, establish a culture. But a lot of these are going to be sort of small clans and tribes that kind of dot the landscape and probably move from place to place depending on, again, the ether, what's in the sky, what elements hold the most influence at that time. You're probably going to get a great deal of superstition around that. Like, what time is best to be in this place? What time is best for travel? What in the heavens can I track that help me to all of these things? Again, very much like astrology. So I have talked about two types of tribal existences. And there are probably more. This is all kind of, again, pretty impromptu with, like, very, very scattered notes and prompts. But we are talking about, at the very least, two types of tribal societies, nomadic and somewhat settled. So in our nomadic tribes, we're going to have a bit more of the superstition surrounding travel and surrounding where are the best places to be. We're going to have probably some practices come about, like pilgrimage. We're going to have some ideas about sacred landmarks. And I don't say sacred in a religious sense, but I mean, even historically, we look at places that represent very strong ideas, ideals, and I mean, I'm from the United States, and I know we talk about things like in our country, we've got Gettysburg. Gettysburg was a place where a great deal went down that strongly ties to our ideals about equality, about abolition of slavery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Gettysburg Address, the Battle of Gettysburg, all these things went down. And so you're going to have, in these nomadic tribes, especially, different landmarks that mark certain things in their history that they hold to as ideals. You're going to have, again, some more settled tribes, and I think that this would probably mostly be in our confederations, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. You're probably not going to see a lot of settlements until tribes band together and form these small coalitions, confederacies, whatever you're going to call them. Kind of like the was it 5 nations of the Iroquois? however you say that word, the tribes that sort of banded together in the um, Iroquois coalition, confederacy, whatever it was called. I should look these things up, but I gotta move too fast. So we're gonna keep going. Uh, we also are gonna see some disparity between hunter-gatherers and early agrarian societies. Again, taking that look at our own history and seeing that our own agrarianism sort of drove out hunter-gatherers as a viable option, because once people begin to settle, um, they're if they hunt and gather, they're going to run out of resources. So they begin to cultivate their resources so that they can harvest and not have to rely on what grows naturally, but grow their own things. So we are going to see some disparity between those two types of society, as well as perhaps some conflict between them. um, with strong ties to the land, you're going to see some shamanistic shamanistic societies early on that probably will develop again as people settle, as they grow their own things. They cultivate their own resources instead of relying on the universe, the gods, the elements, the sun and moon, the rain, whatever. The more independent they come, the less they are going to rely on their shamanistic principles. The more they're going to become more like that other type of society that I mentioned, that wants to sort of harness the elements, harness them and use them for their own gain. And that is the further we're going to drift toward nations, empires, etc., that are really going to rely more on that sort of thing. But again, that's a little further down the road. So in this world, are tribes dominated by kinship? Like, is that what holds them together? Is it ideology? Is it religion? Is it simply it's too dangerous not to be together? I think that there's going to be a little bit of all of those things. I think primarily because it's simple and because it is so visceral and real. I think that we really should stick to it being family based. Like at first, clans and tribes are present because they were born into the same family. And then eventually, as each tribe sort of solidifies its own value systems based on matrilineal. Well, I'll have to figure some of that out here in a bit. But based on the leaders of their tribe, they will eventually solidify some core values to who they are, to what they do as a tribe, as a clan. Are they a warrior-based clan? Are they something that are they soldiers? Are they again hunter-gatherers? Are they agrarian? Are they political? Do they have wealth? Do they have diamonds, gemstones? Do they innovate, finding new fuels and materials that they can use for building? What are their kind of core values? What do they strive to be as a clan or as a tribe? And once those things happen, that's probably where some of the more lasting alliances and coalitions are going to come up. But I do want those to be somewhat limited, because right now, again, being within the first few thousand years of this world being created, I want to make sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. So if there are lasting coalitions or even the beginnings of nations, I want them to be few and far between. what form of governance exists? So I'm tempted to start with the areas where magic holds sway, where the elements are in power, because I think they're the cool and interesting parts of this world. So that's where we're going to start. I think that you're going to get a lot of shamanistic principles in those areas, because, and I don't think those are going to be lost. I think even when those tribes settle and lay down roots and begin this movement toward a more scientific, more civilized, whatever society, I think we're going to still see a lot of those elements of shamanism because they're so real to them. It's not like it's not like some of our cultures where like we think, okay, well, there's actually not any of that, so big whoop. We don't need the gods. We don't need this. We don't need that. Spirituality is kind of dumb. These people are going to be people who see realistically every day the things, the power of the elements. So I think we're going to see a lot of those shamanistic tendencies that remain even like as old as the earth, as old as the world gets. I think we're also going to see, perhaps in some of the more zealotous, in some of the places where more zealots and that type of existence exists, I think we're going to see some more like theocratic councils, things like, basically where they kind of worship the elements or the elemental powers themselves. You might see some other types of governance, but I think those are going to be our two mains, either a theocracy of some sort or a shamanistic governance of some sort, which typically is either led by a medicine man or woman, a shaman, or else by a chieftain with a shaman at their side as advisor, as spiritual leader. So you've got kind of that duality of physical leader, spiritual leader. In the tribes outside of those regions, I think we're going to see, at first, a lot of societies being led by elders. Or by the strong. I think you're gonna see a couple different trains of thought depending on where you're at, how easy the living is, what is in the surroundings, and general, like, well, I already said where they are, right? Anyway, general location. I think that you're going to see some led by elders, where it's almost sort of a council. I should say that we're going to see some councils, whether that is elders or the wealthy or some family lines. Like if it's more family line based, you might see a council of family of a certain family within the tribe. I think we're also going to see some more monarchical. I think we're going to see, monarchical. I think we're going to see some kings and queens, or rather, chieftains. Basically, those tribes that are led by one or two people rather than a group. This might take the form of a tyrant, like a warlord. It might take the form of a benevolent chieftain. It might take the form of, reluctantly, the guy who just kind of got thrown to the top and said, hey, we like this guy, have him lead us. There was one other thought I had on that, but that's okay. Then I think we are going to see some early confederations, some very, very early versions of some of the tribes getting together and saying, well, hey, we do this and you do that. So let's get together so that we can do both of them. Like, we are great at fighting, so we can defend you as long as you need it. But we would also require that you lend to us your agricultural prowess. And so you'd see these two get together where internally they are now a powerhouse of agricultural knowledge, and they begin perhaps growing things that were never possible alone, because now those that are protecting them not only are protecting them, but now they have reason to go and conquer or show off their strength and demand tribute from other tribes, where we're going to see them place that wealth back in the agricultural center, after, of course, paying for repairs for the weapons and upgrading them. We're going to see some of that wealth go back into the agricultural center, where now they're not only growing crops, but they have trade where they're pulling in animals. They're beginning to do research, splicing a couple of plants together, or at least growing them in the same area to see, which grow better and all that sort of thing. So specifically, what factions are going to emerge? I think specifically over the land as a whole, in order to support a D&D type story, we're going to have at least, and we'll do it this way, we'll do the kind of bare minimum. We're going to have at least a circle of druids, an army where fighters can be trained, or at least a society focused on fighting. Either of those two might yield a barbarian. We're going to have a religious organization, from whence come clerics and possibly paladins. We're going to have, let's see, so we said druid circle, a fighting-based society or army. We have to have a religion. I'm going to say we're also going to have at least one major political power, but we'll probably have to have at least two, so that those can balance each other out, because again, the Aether wouldn't let one thing be that much more powerful than another. So let's start there. We got a circle, a place for fighters and barbarians to come from, a religious order for our clerics and paladins, and a couple of major political powers. So I think if we go back to our types of tribal societies, we've got nomadic and settled. These are going to be our settled, our political powers. These are going to be our settled tribes, because again, you're not going to be able to make a massive political force unless there is something like a capital or a place where they can call their own, a center. Perhaps the Dothraki would disagree with me on that, but they weren't really a political power anyway. They were a war power. So yeah, this we'll say these are our settled tribes, and we'll say that these are both coalitions, confederacies, confederations, whatever you want to call them. So we're going to have at least 2 to 3 tribes in each of these groups. I would like to say that one is going to represent the ideals, though not being of the cultures where these elements are prevalent. I think I would like to see one of these political powers represent the ideals of uh, two of the elements. The other one represent the ideals of the other two elements. Now, we could break it down into the, again, last time we talked about masculine and feminine elements and the way that that's typically worked in symbolism and history. Water and earth both being feminine elements and fire and air being the masculine elements. We could do that and have one be a much more peaceful and grounded society, whereas the other would be a perhaps more flighty, even maintaining some of the nomadic qualities of the early tribes, but also maybe a little more prone to conquering, to anger, wrath, to demanding tribute, that sort of thing. We could do that. I think I like the idea better of, again, if we're thinking about this in terms of masculine, feminine energies, masculine, feminine symbols, then I would like to combine two of them, combine one of the masculine and feminine for one of them to represent those ideals in that major political power. The other political power, take the other two, match them up. So we've got water and earth, fire and air. I think if we combined water and air, it would just be far too nomadic, far too like almost ethereal. You might even end up with like a spiritual group of nomads wandering in search of their lost god or whatever. That would be you wouldn't be able to find a valid political power in that. So we're going to take water and fire, which I think could be incredibly interesting. And then we're going to take earth and air, both opposites. Earth being grounded, air being the thing that floats around, water being the healing and following the path of least resistance, fire being the destructive and forging its way through anything. So, how can we make this work, guys? Can I get your input here real quick? I'll pause for a second to sip my coffee and whatnot. What do you guys think? How do we make this work? See, this is the downside of doing all of my thinking live, is it actually makes me think. Sometimes my thinking gets messy, so let's talk this out. If fire and water are combined, what do we get? We get steam. So what about, instead of focusing on the opposing aspects of each, we focus on their synergy? What does steam represent in terms of and let's put it back in terms of political power. If fire is the thing that destroys, consumes and forces its way where it doesn't belong, if water is the thing that heals, it is the thing that directs the flow of energy, it is the thing that follows the path of least resistance, what is steam? Steam is pushed back into the air. There's an ethereal nature to it. There's something celestial, something heavenly about steam, something sublime. There is a heat to it, but it is a uh, it's not an active heat. It is not a heat that destroys. It is a heat that subdues. You can hold a piece of paper over a fire, and it destroys the paper. It burns it up. It consumes it. You hold a piece of paper over a boiling pot, and the paper becomes malleable. Steam softens. Okay, yeah. So that's fantastic. I'm glad we did this live. Actually, that's a very neat thought. So one of these major political powers that we're going to have, one is going to soften. It is going to seek to make use of heat, the heat of fire, but the healing of water to make something sublime that, rather than destroying and consuming or following the path of least resistance, tactfully approaches diplomacy and other things of that nature, and seeks to rule from behind the scenes. It would rather be this political power would rather be in power without anyone knowing it. Simply what people breathe in and out. They don't realize that it's there. They think they have control. And that's how that first political faction is going to function. We'll we'll get a little bit deeper into it, but that is how I think that first one functions. The second one, earth and air. Pausing again to sip while I think. Earth and air combining is much less easy to think about. But initially I was just going to say dust. You know, when wind blows across dirt, it dislodges it and it becomes dust, scatters around. But I think there's something better. What is in the earth? Minerals, I was going to say elements, but elements in a scientific sense, not an Aristotelian sense, Aristotelish, whatever. So, but something gaseous in the earth. When you combine minerals with air under the pressure of the earth, we're talking about things like natural gas, like poisonous almost, things that leak out of the earth and become flammable or or noxious to those that breathe it in. They some people even believe that, for instance, the oracle at Delphi, when she performed her oracles, that she was breathing in a chemical that was being released through the ground that would cause people to hallucinate. And this is where she believed that she got her visions. So if that is where we're going with this earth-air combination in this political structure, we're talking about a noxious gas. We're talking about, again, we're talking politics. This is not conquering. This is not forming a basic familial society. So we are talking, once again, diplomacy. We're talking manipulation. We're talking how do we leverage this and that. So in our fire water tribal coalition, we had steam that seeks to be nothing more than what people breathe in and out. But just as you hold a paper over a boiling pot, it softens and slowly erodes the other opposing force. In this earth air political force, I think we're going to see a rule through manipulation. In the same way that hallucinations and poisons released from the earth are going to, in some respects, manipulate those who breathe it in, this is going to be a political faction that seeks to leverage power, wealth, etc., through manipulatory tactics. Okay, now let's pull back from the analogies of the elements, because these are major political factions in the world at large. These are not the elemental cultures. So that was me using the theme of the world to further the world, which is, I think, a very important thing. And actually, let me pause to talk about that very quickly. I think you look at authors like Brandon Sanderson. He might have one idea for a concept of magic. We'll talk, think of Mistborn and the way that they burnt metals. But those they don't just permeate the magic system, they permeate everything. What was it? Something, I don't want to spoil anything. Spoilers, skip forward like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. What was it that, people, they carve things in steel because I can't remember if it was because it lasted longer or because it was I can't recall what was there, but based on metals, the entire society and world function. So even for the people who didn't have those metal powers, and you can listen now, I'm no longer spoiling. No more spoilers, you can listen now. Even for those that didn't have the sort of metal powers, metal was still prevalent in their culture. And you can see themes of that metal even in their political structures, even in kind of the way that the nobles that didn't have Mistborn, that weren't Mistborn, but maybe had some, but the nobles that weren't Mistborn, you can still see some of the same principles of that metallic magic system in the way that they led and interacted. So that's what I was doing there. I was simply taking the themes of my world and working it through the entire thing, as opposed to just haphazardly throwing together a political structure because it makes sense. So, two political structures, two major political factions. These are coalitions of tribes. One seeks to rule by, we'll call it soft force. They seek to apply pressure and slowly erode with a soft force and rule from behind the scenes where no one even realizes they're there. This society might eventually, once it has evolved to its extent, might eventually have a thriving spy network or a secret police that pervades its society. This other political structure, it seeks to rule by manipulation, by perhaps at times scare tactics, perhaps at times bribery, perhaps at sometimes bluffing, persuading, or seducing its way to power. It's more likely to make political allied marriages. It's more likely to to throw its weight around in terms of favors and other things of that nature. Less military and more well, whereas the first might say, I have this secret on you, Sorry. Whereas the first might hold all the secrets and use them subtly to manipulate what's going on. The second is just going to come right out and say, hey, be a shame if somebody heard about this. So what about you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and don't let this out? I think those are very strong ideas. I don't know what I'm going to call them yet. So in the meantime, actually, let me go here very quickly, and I'll just put in fantasy country name generator. Okay, we've got. Ooh, these are rough. Oh man, I've got things I don't even know how to pronounce. Let me let me actually share this with you. Where is it? Present. Share this screen. Like, what is this first one? Ruskuze? Rashuzi? Then we got Kuswoijan? Kuswajan? Like, these are a little rough. Stride free? Not a clue. Ablaria. Okay. That one's almost not weird. That one sounds like I'm saying like hablar in Spanish, like to speak. Hablaria, the land of to speak. Let's call this one Albaria. So yeah, let's do Albaria. Albaria is the one that we'll say rules from the shadows. I'll come up with some better names later and maybe let you guys know what I've got. Albaria and Cluria. Let's swap those. Albaria is the manipulator. Cluria is the rule from the shadows type people. Okay. All right. Let's. Oh, whoops! Didn't realize I didn't change that. Okay. So now we've got our two major political factions. I'm gonna say a druid circle is easy in this world, and it can come realistically from any place of power. Literally any of them could support a druidic circle. However, we are going to make the premier druidic circle. I'm going to pull a little bit from from Matthew Mercer's Ashari and kind of the idea of like the four elements, because again, that's what we're doing here. Did you guys know we're building a world based on the four elements? You know, so I am going to pull a little bit from that. However, instead of them being scattered, I want a single locale wherein all four elements hold sway. Perhaps this is actually the nexus of the world. Like, this is out of this primordial grouping of elemental energies. This is where the primordial elementals sort of began their creative work. I think that's super cool. So let's go with that. How would that even present itself? You know what? Maybe in the same way that, like, let's sort of take this in microcosm, macrocosm terms. As a macrocosm, the world is in a dynamic equilibrium held by the Aether in place. This little nexus of creation, this in itself is an entirely, like, it is a microcosm of the macrocosmic principles, where within just a small, maybe, I don't know, like miles squared, 10 miles squared, 50 miles squared, I don't know. Whatever seems right in oh shoot, this is my world. we'll say 10 miles squared right now, and then I will look it up and maybe come back at you with the change. We'll say within this little 10 square mile area, you're getting all four elements just dumped everywhere, and it in itself is constantly changing, and the the Aether on the macrocosm is holding all the elements in place in the world, but on a microcosm, it is causing this one small area to sort of bubble and shift with all of these different elemental energies. And that is where our circle of druids has come from, being a being a group that is tied directly to like the creative activity of the world. And I think that has deep ties not only to the four elements in their raw forms, and the implications there for druids. I think it also has implications for like they might see at certain times just a a gazelle jump out of the primordial stuff. Like if where there was just a desert, now there's a massive swamp, and out of this goopy water, a gazelle just jumps, or an elephant walks out of a tree, or a beast that's never before been seen sort of jumps out of an area where two elements are meeting. Like this would be such a cool concept for why druids have learned to wild shape. How they've learned so many different forms. I think that is so much fun. So this nexus of creation, out of which the druids have evolved, is just that. It is creativity. It is the is the nexus of all things. I think that's super cool. And the druidic circle could be literally whichever circle you want. I would personally like to see a circle of creation come out of this, right? A sort of homebrewed circle of creation. But could be circle of stars, could be circle of wildfires, could be circle of the land. Like you want just to take it really back to its roots, go circle of the land. Kind of underutilized. There may be more powerful subclasses, more powerful circles, but the circle of the land is so cool and thematic. I understand optimization and stuff, and everybody wants the new little things, but I love circle of the land. I think it's so cool, and it really does a great job at explaining kind of, or not explaining, but focusing on the core fantasy of playing a druid. If you want more on playing a druid and role-playing a druid, I guess this would be a great time to say I am releasing a video next week on role-playing druids like druids, because I think we forget what they are, and they're so cool. So I'm going to be taking a look at shamanistic practices, druidry, and other earth-based faiths and belief systems, and kind of saying what principles we can apply to our role play about those things, because there's so much cool stuff, and it can really show us how to look through the eyes of druidic style people, and do their cultures and beliefs justice in our own role play. I think it's super fun. Moving on. That's our circle. That's our two major political factions. We'll say for our fighters, I want a nomadic troop like the Dothraki. Maybe not quite so horse-focused, because, but a wandering band of people who just pillage. Like, that's what they do. And that's how they find their sustenance. So you might hear, you might even see, like, watchtowers in different places for more organized tribes that then they have to like sound the alarm, like, 10 miles away I see this group, they're coming to take our stuff, hide it, whatever. Ready the defenses, I don't know, whatever. So I want a group like that for fighters to come out of. I think that it could not only present a reason for them to have military or fighting training, but also it could give them some very interesting like character hooks where, okay, are they okay with that style of living? Did they come out of that style of living? Is this a conflict that they're going to be presented with internally? Do they still have connections there? If they're running, if they run into these people again, are they going to be like upset with them? All that sort of thing. So I'm going to leave this one a little underdeveloped at the moment because honestly, I just don't find it that interesting. It's enough for me to know at the moment that these people are a sort of almost a cross between like Viking and Dothraki. Maybe they have some sailing experience, maybe that, whatever, but they are whether for their gods, whether for their beliefs, or just because that's the easiest way for them to survive, they train and they fight and they pillage and sweep across the land, and maybe they have some interesting interactions with our two political factions that we've already talked about, because that could get interesting. Maybe they run into our druid circle. Whatever happens. But I'm going to say that's enough on them for right now. And what was the last thing that I said we needed at the very least? A religion. I think that several religions honestly could come out of this world that we've created, because you will doubtless have in these places of elemental power, like those focal points, you're going to have religions based on the elements like that. It just would not make any sense for there not to be. So and each of those I think would come about differently, and it would come to its own unique tenets. I don't even think if we see a religion that sort of is organized around the fire primordial elemental being, I don't think all of those religions are all going to look the same. If you're up in this area, you might have a focus on conquering, on that, like the fire sweeping through and consuming. If you're down here and you have a fire-based faith, it might be focused on like the hearth and food, cooking, or light. Over there you might have a very like moralistic, purity based society. Like you have to be moral and right and be in the light of the primordial fire king or queen or what have you. So I don't even think any of them are going to look the same depending on where you are, based on the same primordial. So let's instead focus on a sort of faith rather than a religion. I think that a faith that sort of combines the elements together, no, even better, an ether-based faith, because this is something that could be super fun. I think of Min Irik from my live play stream over on the Looking for Legends channel. Rather, we're about to start dropping. Next week is when the first episode of that campaign will happen. But there's a character named Min Irik. My players love to call him Mini Rick. That's not his name. The point is, he has a faith that's based on the stars. In that world, the gods once ruled from a place called the firmament, and it was a solid sky where it's sort of a magical communications device between the prime material plane and the planes that the gods were actually on. The goddess of magic had it created so that the gods could have connection to their subjects, I guess. when the goddess of magic died, the firmament shattered in something called the Shattering, and it came down like Chicken Little style, the sky is falling, but it also exploded upward and created the stars. Min Irik follows the stars because he sees them as the last thing left of the gods. So perhaps the major faiths and religions are focused primarily on the elements, but there's a faith that's come up that rather than worshiping the elements, they believe that the Aether, the guiding principle of fate, that's the real god to worship because it directs all the other things. Perhaps they personify it and make it a god itself. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they take on a form of animism or pantheism, I should say. Yeah, pantheism, not animism. Perhaps they take on a form of pantheism and sort of believe that the Aether is in all things and all things are the Aether. And so they have a great sanctity for life. Perhaps they don't. I think it would be cool because a lot of D&D faiths are focused on like deities themselves. I think that having or animism, where there's like a spirit of the tree, a spirit of the stone, oversimplified, but you get the gist. I think it would be neat to have a sort of monistic, pantheistic faith where almost, I guess you could see it as in Hindu belief, there might be a million gods, but there are a great deal of teachings surrounding the idea that they themselves are not real. They are simply manifestations of another power. I think Brahma. I don't want to mess it up, so let's move on from the name. But all of the many gods and spirits and whatever else, even like our own souls, are just projections, manifestations, or illusions of the ultimate one spirit. So quite literally, it is in all things and all things are it. And I think that would be a cool faith to explore in D&D. So let's do that. The Aether, and again, for those of you who maybe didn't get the chance to watch last time, or are just now joining, the Aether is a guiding principle. It's the sky that moves different planets and stars throughout the heavens to hold all four elements in a sort of dynamic equilibrium, allowing some to be a little more powerful at times, but not too powerful. It sort of guides the principles of the world. It is fate. It is, while having agency in the world, it is much less sentient or much less personal, I should say. While maintaining sentience, it is much less personal than the elemental, the primordial elemental beings that form the world. So, this faith says the Aether is the real thing to be worshipped. They say it can control the elements. So whatever controls the elements and keeps them in check, that is the true God. I don't think that they personify it. I think they find a great deal of comfort in the mystery of it not being personified. I think they are a very esoteric society, focusing more on mysteries than on those things which can be practically worked out. I think that their highest order are those that perhaps have spent years in study and meditation and feel closer to the Aether itself, rather than rather than a hierarchy. I think that this society, this faith, is structured based on your ties to the ether, your years of meditation, your years of study. So I don't think it has a strict hierarchy. I think that those with the most wisdom are those that will be followed, because wisdom is the principle. In the way that Aether guides the elements, wisdom guides practical life. So I think that the person with the most wisdom will be the most respected and the one that people tend to follow. So this is going to be a religion, a faith of sages. Their practices might include isolation, whether solitude or whether in some form of cloister. I think their practices are going to include meditation and writing of meditation literature, which is something that not a lot of us in the modern day, at least not in the modern United States, understand. Meditation literature is a form of literature which seeks not to be understood, but to be meditated on. It's not something that you're supposed really to look at and and say, oh, well, that's what that means. It's meant to be considered like a cow chewing their cud over and over again, spitting it back up and and chewing it once again. That's what meditation literature is. You might never arrive at an answer, but you'll have spent an entire lifetime on a journey, and that's kind of the idea. So some of their practices would include both meditation and composition of meditation literature. I think a lot of poetry and song would be composed by this group. As lyric has long in our real world been a way to express the things which you can't in prose. So a faith without hierarchy that values wisdom, meditation, composition, lyric, and mystery. The wiser and more understanding of mysteries and guiding principles that one is, the higher they are respected, the higher presumably they are in the non-existent hierarchy, and the more followers they gain within this faith. I am going to call this, let's see, something that has to do with Aether. Aetherism? No. Nope, scratch that. I'm horrible at naming things. This is what happens when people watch me live. When I have time to really sit and think, then I just brainstorm for a long time and come up with things. I'm horrible at naming things. So if you have an idea for what this faith should be named, let me know in the comments. Now that we've got all four of those kind of major things, I think we can begin to move on. We've touched on early political structures. Okay. I think that, unfortunately, this is going to require a part 3. And really then we'll get into a little bit more socio-political, sort of narrowed down approach to practically what does it mean, or what are our factions, what are the things that operate on the daily lives of people. So, as for now, we will note once again that we have a great deal of tribes, and next time I get on, I will perhaps have some more detail on those things. We have a great deal of small tribes that were born out of families and now have their own sort of ideologies and pseudo political structures. We have seen two of those, namely, well, we have seen some of them form into very small coalitions, two of which have become major political powers within their respective areas. We have also seen that the nexus of creation has produced a circle of druids that presumably could be a homebrewed circle of creation. We've seen a wandering band of Viking Dothraki warriors that pillage and steal and fight wherever they go to sustain themselves. We have seen a religion that has formed itself from the Aether and is based largely in a monistic pantheism for its structure, as well as valuing wisdom and mystery over the practical things of life. Again, I am releasing a video next week on role-playing as a druid, so make sure to check that out. And once I finish this little live series, what would you guys like to see explored next? Next time, again, we will be focusing more on some of the smaller factions. We had to take a macrocosm, then next week we will, or not maybe next week, but next time, sorry, we will take it into a microcosm. That said, that is all I've got for you all. Thank you for all who jumped in, and thank you for all who will eventually watch this. Till next time, gotta roll.